welcome to The Broker Experience. We are your hosts. I'm Rick Dulai, and I'm joined by Rob Scalisi. Today, we are missing our partner, Chuck Cascione, but hopefully we'll make up for it another time.
Yes, duty called for Chuck today. This business is always moving, very fluid, and he had another issue to deal with today on a real estate transaction. So he's not going to be able to join us today.
Yep, but we'll make up for it. We'll make up for it another time. But today we're going to talk a little bit about why experience matters in this business. And it's interesting because you were just telling me a story earlier of what you saw on Facebook. Could you share that with our listeners?
Absolutely. And hopefully people don't take this like to where they hate me for saying this, but I don't know. It did rub me the wrong way. And I understand the point this person was trying to make. But the post that I saw, Rick, was an agent standing in front of their office door. So you could clearly see the name of the company in the office that they were with. And he was holding up about a 3x3 cardboard sign that says, "Nobody cares how long you've been in the business." Now, we could assume a number of things what he meant by that. So I'm going to make my assumption as to what he meant. And I have heard agents over the years say, well, I've been doing this for over 30 years.
Yeah.
Meaning they're trying to imply that they know more than maybe the other agent.
Right.
And I also find that like a little annoying. Nobody really cares. Just do your job. And
right.
It's always, to me, and I am a guy that's been doing it over 30 years, right? It's very apparent to me whether an agent's new or not new, seasoned, not seasoned, whether they know what they're doing.
Right.
But what I would caution the agent holding the sign to take into consideration, because of course with Facebook, you make one comment and then 40 other comments follow.
Right.
And you could see there.
Wait a minute. Are you saying the comment section on Facebook is just full of people?
I refrained from responding to, just so you know, because I really don't want people to perceive it the way that I think they may perceive it.
Right.
But, most of the people responding to his post are chiming in as if like, hey, you've been doing it 30 years, get out of the business. And I know enough that I don't need to learn from you.
Oh, right.
That was my perception of what they may have been trying to say. And again, for a guy like me who's been in the business, and I feel like I really do know what I'm talking about, I've also had the opposite thing happen where maybe a newer agent, inexperienced, was doing something incorrectly that I know either whether it's a legal issue, a law, a state law requirement, something within a transaction where they're doing it incorrectly, and try to voice my opinion saying, hey, by the way, you may want to do this.
Right.
And I'm telling you this because I am a broker. I oversee multiple agents, and I've been doing this for 30 plus years where they take offense to that statement. So my message would be like, nobody knows everything. And if you're newer in the business, why are you so offended as to trying to maybe possibly learn something from somebody that maybe knows more than you do?
Right.
That's all. So that sign kind of rubbed me the wrong way for the reason I think they're posting it.
Yeah, sure. And the thing is, more than likely, they're just being sensational. It's getting attention, which is what you want to do. That's marketing. You get attention, and then you get people noticing you. But you're running a risk of being perceived in a negative light for having that attitude. But more importantly, I think I agree that nobody cares how long you've been in the business, but what kind of experience do you actually have matters, right? Like an agent who's only been in the business for 5 years, but is doing 20, 30 transactions a year could have more experience than someone who's been doing it for 20 years and only closes a deal once every couple of months, right? So experience isn't just time alone. It's performance over time, right? And you could have more experience in a shorter time than someone who's been in the business longer. But if you've only been in the business for like a month or two, or it's your first year in business, it's more than likely you don't have enough experience to know how to handle everything. And hopefully you're either on a team or you have a broker who has that experience that can fill in those gaps for you. right?
And let's face it, experience matters. Plain and
Right.
simple, it does. And if over time, very important too, you can do a ton of transactions. If you don't retain the information that you learn on every transaction, because realize everyone is completely different, right?
Yeah.
Some are easy, some are difficult. And the things that you can learn over the years of doing multiple transactions, as long as you retain it, that's, again, how you become seasoned, right? And I can't really think anymore in my career of a scenario that I have not experienced.
Right.
But maybe last year I had one, and it was involving a land contract that we could touch on. But even yesterday, as an example, an inexperienced agent showed his colors.
Okay.
And it was funny because he wasn't trying to show that he was inexperienced, but it just came through.
Right.
And I'll give you just the slight example. We closed, and things that led up to closing, I can tell you honestly, had I not been involved, it would have never even come together.
Right.
So we're done closing. He gets his closing envelope, pulls out his check, and he's staring at his check, just lost, right? Looking at the commission check.
Okay.
And the lost look, of course, made me think he doesn't think he got the right amount of money.
Right. Like you didn't get enough.
He didn't get enough. And now he represented the buyer, which means what, Rick, with the earnest money deposit?
That there's money being held from the earnest money, probably by his office.
Exactly, by his office.
Right.
And when he kind of looked at me, I said, what, are you looking for more money in your check? And he kind of shook his head. Yes. I said, you're holding the earnest money? He said, oh, yeah, that's right. He goes, I got so many transactions going on right now. I forgot where that money was being held.
Yeah, sure. It's okay.
It's okay. Sure. Got that many. You forgot where somebody's money's being held.
Right.
Where would it be being held?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you would placed it with the title company who was doing the closing, which
Yeah.
in this case he didn't, right?
Well, and if he did, he would have got it in his check.
Right.
So, yeah, no, that I definitely that's a good example of lack of experience, but it didn't affect your transaction.
No,
right?
not at all.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
at all.
So, and I think that's the whole thing is like also just knowing a lot of times buyers don't understand when you have to bring funds to a closing, it needs to be wired or it needs to be certified funds, a cashier's check. If you're just showing up with your checkbook, that can be a problem because once the closing starts, you're not allowed to leave to run across the street to go get a cashier's check and bring it back or something like that.
It's, I've had that actually happen and people had to do it. And of course, delays closings.
Yeah.
And if people, based on their schedules, particularly the title companies, right? If they've got another closing lined up right after,
Sure.
You know how these things go. We stack appointments back to back and you run from this location. Now they're going back across town or whatever the case is, being prepared as the agent representing your client, be it the buyer or the seller, is very important. Even this morning, I had another closing, and I applaud the agent, and she is an experienced agent. She called me this morning and said, hey, just so you know, I received the seller's package, and I realized that the title company overlooked our septic escrow agreement, and they were not holding those escrowed funds for the septic aside from the seller's proceeds.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, again, that was her client. And she looked for that, and she was smart enough to get that adjusted before closing. And she called me to give me a heads up in case I reviewed my package before closing and say, hey, where's that money? Right?
Yeah.
She beat me to the punch on that. So again, there's the sign of a very experienced agent.
Yeah, and just to clarify that too, a septic escrow, when you have a septic tank and you're selling the property and the new homeowner, the buyer, is going to be in this home, the septic needs to be tested to make sure that it's working correctly. And in case it's not, a repair escrow could be held to say, okay, if there's a problem with the septic, or if you've already identified a problem ahead of time, a certain amount of money is going to be held after closing. And if it's needed for the septic, it'll be used towards the septic because it's the seller's responsibility. Otherwise, that money will just be cut back to the seller once we've passed the inspection.
Yeah, and to elaborate on that too, this is in Macomb County in particular. They have what's called a point of sale septic and well requirement, which means that if you're selling a home on a septic and a well system, They both have to be inspected by Macomb County Health Department to make sure that they are currently working as intended and meet the Macomb County Health Department requirements for those systems. Furthermore, if one of those items were to fail, in city water, which would be for your well, city sewer for a septic, are available to hook up, and those systems fail, Macomb County Health Department will not allow you to repair them. You have to connect to the city services.
Right.
If city services aren't available to hook up to, you're allowed to repair them. But what happens, and a lot of people don't realize this, at the system, meaning the septic and or well, they kind of go dormant when not in use.
Yeah.
So you cannot conduct the proper inspection if it's been vacant or not used for a period of 30 days or more.
Right. Okay.
And in this case, this house I closed on, that was the case.
Okay.
Now, the seller would have been smart to have those things inspected and tested while they were still living there and using the items,
Right.
knowing that they were going to sell the house.
Right.
Then they get the accurate test, assuming that, of course, it passed the Macomb County Health Department requirements. That certification was good for 1 year from the date of inspection. So they could have up to a year to get that sale completed and transfer that without having to hold that escrowed amount.
Right.
You know, in that amount, I mean, we held $15,000. So now the new owner
Yeah.
needs to go in there, start using the system
Right.
for a period of at least 30 days so that they can accurately test the system.
Yeah, because it's not a small amount of money.
No,
They're
not
holding
at
a
all.
big chunk of money.
No, and then you get into, you know, if it fails and, you know, getting it repaired, and if it's not enough money that we already held, and there's language in the escrow agreement that says, you know, the seller's responsible, but still, you know, after closing, you think you're done,
Yeah,
you know, and now it's got to go back. And by the way, your 15 grand wasn't enough money, and now we need more. And, you know, nobody wants to deal with that.
You know, this is not something that's happened to me yet, but it's something that came to mind. There was another closing here at our office this morning that I was kind of overhearing what was going on. And it made me think of something. This is kind of experience maybe outside of real estate where it can help. In this case, it seemed like they did not have certified funds, the buyer, with them. They had their personal check. So their only option now was to either get a wire or get the certified funds. And it struck me, I almost stuck my head in to see if I could help, but I thought, nah, this is none of my business. Just stay out of it. But with all the apps that we have on our phone now, you could initiate a wire sitting there at the closing right on your phone. Right. So, and in that case, you could at least have confirmation that you can show the title company, I just sent the wire to you, and now they can be on the lookout for it. So really understanding how tools and technology work today, bringing that kind of experience into our real estate realm, you know, I could have saved a closing. Otherwise, things could fall apart very easily.
Yeah, and you can even take it back a notch too, just going, why didn't the agent representing the buyer go through this clearly to make sure that the buyer understands?
Understood,
Again,
yeah.
You're supposed to be the professional.
Right.
You're supposed to be the person with the experience because you are the person with the license, right?
Yeah.
And you need to discuss these things. And I always make it a point, especially with buyers, well, and I wouldn't even say that, and sellers as well, to go over the settlement statement with them prior to the closing for a number of reasons. They understand it. For buyers, it's not a pressure situation when it's one-on-one, right?
Right.
Anybody that's been at a real estate closing, you know, you're limited on time and people are throwing documents at you going, hey, this says this and then sign here. And this next one goes here and then sign here, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to understand and digest this. Well, the biggest part of a closing, right, is the money.
Right.
So having that settlement statement beforehand and going over it with that buyer, line item by line item, getting to closing and realizing the statement I just went over and the number matches identically to what the title company is about to review with you, there's no pressure.
Right.
Not for that buyer, or certainly less pressure.
Yeah.
My closing today, young gal, first-time buyer, she bought a very nice house, $320,000, very expensive, right?
Yeah.
And I reviewed that settlement statement with her prior to the closing.
Right.
When we got to the closing, she was comfortable enough when the title closer brought that same document out to say, let's review this. She said, there's no need. He already went over it with me. I understand it. Show me where to sign.
Yeah. Right? Saves time in the closing, makes things go smoother.
The closer looked at me and said, I love you.
Of course. Yeah, no, I mean, think about that. From the buyer side, of course, it's very important, the numbers, because they got to know exactly how much to bring. But for the seller, sometimes they're thinking, hey, I'm selling my house for $350,000. I'm expecting $350,000,
right?
Right. So you got closing costs, you got this insurance, you got transfer tax, you got all these different things. And so that 350 is really like 337, 525. So making sure they understand where all those numbers went, makes a lot of sense.
How many times have you heard this before, Rick, whether it's the buyer or the seller? Exact words I hear from clients. Well, who pays closing?
Yeah.
Who pays closing?
Yeah.
I'll say, well, you as a seller have certain closing costs.
Yep.
You as a buyer have certain closing costs,
Right.
especially when you're getting a mortgage, right? Completely different items.
Right.
You're not paying any of the buyers not paying any of the sellers, unless for whatever reason it was agreed upon within the contract in writing signed by all parties.
Right.
But I thought it's funny how they word it too. Well, who pays closing?
But it's almost sometimes like it's just what they've heard. They've heard other people say, or maybe they've seen on TV. I'm sure attorneys run into this all the time when their clients are asking them to act like TV lawyers. You know what I mean? Like they think, oh, well, object. Well, this isn't a kind of case where you object. It's kind of the same thing. We run into people have used words or they use terminology that they've heard. Like one thing I hear common is, and I correct people when they say this, but instead of saying the word realtor, they say realtor.
Yeah, realtor.
Or realtor, and it's like, realtor.
Yeah, realtor. There's no additional A in between the word real and tor.
Yeah.
Realtor.
All right, so going back to one of the things that you just touched on when we first started talking was this land contract deal. So what exactly happened there and how did your experience pay off here?
This was really a complicated one. And I don't think, an inexperienced agent would have been just really out of their league on that. So it goes back to a lady and her at the time would have been her boyfriend purchased an old farmhouse on property way out in a rural part of Macomb County. And they bought it on a land contract. Okay. And for those of you who don't know what a land contract is, it's really just seller financing, meaning the seller owned this property free and clear. They took a deposit or a down payment from the borrower or the buyers and agreed to take payments on the balance due for the property over a period of time at an interest rate, etc.
So sometimes people use the term rent to own, but really land contract, you get ownership at the time of the contract. It just gets, what's the word you would use?
Well, you've got basically an escrow agreement, right? And the deed is placed in escrow.
It's placed in escrow. So it's in your name, but it's not going to officially transfer until
it gets paid off. Right. Yeah. Until that land contract balance is fulfilled by the buyer.
Right.
So, and a lot of people, especially back in the day, they didn't even do it to that degree, right? They were more of handshake deals. Yeah. And this was an old land contract. So now when you have a couple buying something that are not married, usually you're very specific as to how title by the two buyers is going to be held. And just a couple examples would be joint tenants with rights of survivorship. And all that's going to mean is the two people buying the house own the house 100% undivided, right? Because sometimes people think, I own 50% and they own 50%. That's not true. You both own 100%.
Right. Okay.
You're both 100% obligated for all the terms. So in this case, they didn't specify joint tenants.
Yeah.
They didn't specify tenants in common. But on a land contract, if you don't specify and you're not married, it is assumed, which I hate that word.
All right.
It is assumed joint tenants. So here's what happens in
It's
this
assumed
scenario.
joint tenants.
It's assumed joint tenants because you're not married.
Right.
And again, for anybody who doesn't know, joint tenant means that should something happen to one of the parties, like let's say they pass on, their interest in that property does not go to the surviving party that owned it or bought it with them. It would go to the heirs
right.
of that deceased person,
Right.
you know, which opens up a whole nother
Right.
scenario. So now here's what happens is the unmarried couple got married,
Right.
then also got divorced.
Right.
In their divorce decree, the divorce decree stated that Mrs. Buyer, now they've paid off this land contract, so they own the house, but they get a divorce. Mrs. Buyer is going to live there. And if she sells that house within 1 year, proceeds from the sale of that house after expenses are to be split between Mr. Buyer and Mrs. Buyer equally, 50-50.
Right. This is that's her intending to live there for 1 year after the divorce.
Yes, and sell the property.
That gives her time to sell the property.
Correct.
Yeah.
Goes on to say, though, here's where I found this very, very strange by the attorney that drafted this. And a lot of people think, well, an attorney did it, so it's right.
Yeah. No.
I looked at this and scratched my head saying, I have no idea who did this and why they did it this way for you. It gave a remedy. We talked about remedies in the other podcast, right? It gave it. If she does not sell it within a year, when she sells it, no time frame, Mr. Buyer gets X dollars.
Right.
Well, here's what happened. She kept that property for another 30 years or so.
Right.
So what do you think happened to the value of that property?
Of course, it went up.
Here's what also happened in there. Mr. Seller, or Mr. Buyer rather, the owner of the property, passed away.
Right. Okay.
So now we go to sell this property, and my client, Mrs. Buyer, now the seller, right? She doesn't bring up any of this.
Probably didn't remember any of that.
Yeah, she was elderly, definitely. So, and that's the problem, right? When
Right.
things aren't really in line and very specific as time goes by and you think you're going to remember and people don't remember. So we sell the property. She's the only signer, right? Signs up in the lawn. We get a call for somebody that wants to see the house, run out and show the house. And this person looking at the house says, I own this house. I'm looking going, well, I don't really know you. And I'm dealing with this lady over here that I know is the owner of the property. So we get title work in. And of course, now there's this unrecorded interest of the deceased man, right? And the lady that showed up to see the house that told me she owns the house is his only surviving sister.
I see.
So now we're back to the assumed thing of tenants in common.
Right.
And so surviving sister now is starting to allude to the fact of, let me know when closing is. I'm coming to closing and getting half of the proceeds. So, of course, my client, the one I know is the owner of the property, start bringing this up. And she goes, oh, she's digging for money and she doesn't have it. I made the payments on this thing and I'm the one who's maintained this property and on and on and on, right?
Yep.
So we get title work in and we said, we're really going to need to see a copy of a divorce decree, as to what took place or what was supposed to happen to this property once these people ended their marriage. And of course, that happened back in like 1989.
Yeah, so now that could be difficult to find.
She couldn't find it.
Oh, geez.
So usually those things are of public record. Yeah. Now, fortunately for me, my wife works for a court, so she has access to all those public record kind of computer systems, and she was able to find a copy of that divorce decree, which indicated that, of course, poorly worded, but that the seller, Mr. Seller, would get X dollars, a flat fee based on when that property sold if it did not sell within that first year time period.
Wow.
So, of course, the sister of the deceased, not real happy with that, but there's nothing. This is what the court divorce document.
Right. It's a
says
legal
happens.
document now.
It's a
That's
legal
how it has to
document.
be executed.
But she, again, she needed to come to closing and sign.
Yeah.
The person I perceived as my client had to come to closing and sign.
Right.
And then on top of it, the lady who I was dealing with, post all of that stuff, had gotten married again.
Oh boy.
And so she has a new husband, and they put that property into the name of their trust.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there were documents and documents upon documents. And it really was taking something that started out to be what was going to be a relatively easy transaction. And it became very, very complicated.
Well, it seemed like everything
very quickly
that could go wrong in the initial design of this land contract did go wrong. Right.
Yeah. And I think that, when we talk about, agents being experienced, I think that's how we got on this topic, right?
Yeah.
That's where experience is going to prevail, and again, I have nothing against people wanting to get into this industry. It's a great industry. It's not for everybody, but it's a great industry. And if you're the right type of person, right type of personality, it can be very lucrative. But a new agent, right? We were all new at one time.
Yeah.
I don't think would have been able to even come close.
Yeah. They
to
would
figuring this
They
out.
would be relying on their team lead or their broker to hold their hand through a process like that. So, I mean, again, like I said, I don't know. I'm not so worried about how many years somebody's been in the business, but how much experience do you have? And usually you can pick up on that just within a few minutes of conversation with another agent. You can understand where they're at in their experience level.
Yeah, the toughest thing I think out there is that we all get licensed, right? So the general public says, well, they're licensed, they're working for a broker, they must know what they're doing. And it's not always the case.
Yeah.
So again, I'm with you. I don't care how long you've been doing it, because I have seen that too, right? Where old time agent going, oh, you guys with all those computers and your
Right.
text messages, and I don't do business that way.
Right.
You have to stay relevant.
Yeah.
You've got to continue your education. You've got to keep up with technology. If you don't keep up, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so to the agent's point with that, nobody does care how long you've been doing it, just provided you do know what you're doing, your communication skills are good. And
Well, I'm going to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. He's just trying to do a marketing stunt. It's something to post on social media and then get a rise. And obviously he did get reactions and maybe a lot of people agreeing with him and whatever. But again, I think comes down to your experience, not the time. Obviously there's a experience component to how long you've been in this business. But then again, we talked about this maybe in our first episode, but there is something to knowing how everything worked before too. Like just because we have all this technology that can fill in our forms and do e-signatures and all this, that doesn't mean that, there's no value in knowing how it happened before. Cause I remember when I first started, I used to make 5 copies of a purchase agreement,
right.
And then when you would get everything signed, you would have the sellers sign 5 copies. The buyers would sign 5 copies, because everybody was going to get a copy. The buyer broker was going to get it. The selling broker was going to get it. The seller's broker was going to get it. The title company was going to get it. And the buyer and the seller were going to get
5 copies.
They all wanted fresh ink original copies. So I remember doing that. And there is a value to understanding why, because now copies can be forged, copies can be, manipulated, but the original wet signature with ink on the paper, dated and consistent between all the copies, everybody had that copy. So if somebody tried something funny, there was an original to say, no, this is the original. Look, this doesn't have that crossed out.
Right.
That kind of thing. So there was a value to it. So if you understand that, then when you see how these digital signatures work, you understand why that works now, because now there's an authentication of that signature. It's a date timestamp that's encoded into the signature. So it's the same thing as having a wet signature on paper, multiple copies.
Here's another good point for knowing how to do it without the technology. we lost power yesterday.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
What
yeah.
if you were trying to do a deal?
Yeah.
Can't do a deal?
Yeah.
Still handwrite or get a typewriter out.
Fill out the paperwork by hand.
Take a drive, go get an ink signature,
Yep, go get ink
right?
signature. Yeah, if you don't know how to do that, you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
That's
Every
true.
once in a while, I have an elderly client, right, and they don't do computers.
Yeah.
And so you gotta, still
Yeah,
gotta go
sometimes
over and get
people
those
don't
wet
have the email
signatures.
addresses and things like that, and you have to go in person and get everything signed. But even then, now what we do is once we get the original, we're putting it into a digital copy and distributing it. But still, that experience of knowing what the purpose of everything is, why we're doing things a certain way. I've even explained that, like when we do processes for the office, like this is an automated process, or this part can be more efficient. The starting point is, how do you do this all on paper and pencil? If we were just a paper office and everything had to be handwritten and on paper, what would that process look like? And then you look at that and you say, okay, I can make this more efficient. I can make this more efficient. I need to make sure I duplicate these steps, because there's a physical step here where an office administrator or somebody is going to go through. And then I can make this more efficient. I can make this electronic, et cetera, et cetera. But you got to know what the actual process is. And the actual process is a human thing. It's not a computer thing.
The other thing about experience, Rick, too, that just crossed my mind is understanding, like, the settlement statement.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when somebody's getting a mortgage.
Right.
I had the conversation today with the closer, and she was obviously a very experienced closer. And she told the same story to my buyer that I told to my buyer when I reviewed the document.
Oh, really?
And what that story was comparing the closing disclosure document to what used to be a HUD document.
HUD statement. Yeah.
So then we had the combined ALTA by the title company, which not exactly, but it certainly looks and feels a lot more like the old HUD used to. And it was very easy to understand. And I made the example of, I'm going to show you the ALTA, and then I'm going to show you that the two final figures for you on both the CD and the ALTA do match.
Yeah.
I said, and the reason I don't really want to show you the CD is it's plain and simple. It's just confusing. You've got groups of charges.
Yeah.
And then you have a summary page, and they're taking, hey, group A is over here, and that came from the second page, and this section over here came from the third page down in J, and then this one carried over. And I said, whereas that HUD, you've got two columns.
Yeah.
The buyer's charges, debits, and the buyer's credits.
Yep.
And that's it.
That's it.
And you can go down line item by line item and understand what each one of those are for.
Right.
Especially like prepaid interest. Why is there prepaid interest?
Yeah.
People think, I don't understand why. And you
Yeah.
go into that explanation. You're closing the month out in which you close on the property. Now your loan gets to accrue interest for a full month or 30-day period. First payment being due on the first of the following month.
Right.
Paying for that arrears interest for the previous month.
Right.
And explaining and being able to explain that.
Yeah.
And then setting up the escrow accounts if somebody has one, right?
Yeah.
How come I've got taxes over here back due to the seller, and then I've got taxes over here going into an escrow account? I thought it's included with my payment, and being able to explain to them that the amount collected plus the number of the payments that you're going to make with 1/12 equal installments of homeowners insurance, summer tax, winter tax going into that escrow account, plus your pre-setup amount. By the time each one of these items is due, the funds are there to make that payment. How does an aggregate adjustment, which is a credit, factor into this? And what is an aggregated adjustment, and explaining that to them? That's, to me, if you're going to be an agent, you can't shrug off and say, oh, I don't need to know that. That's the title company's job, or that's the lender's job.
Well, even something simple. First of all, your client is going to ask you questions.
Right.
And then if you were just like, well, don't ask me, ask the title company. That doesn't seem professional. But even something simple, just like the EMD, the way it shows up on the statement looks confusing sometimes, especially to a client that's never seen a statement like that.
They think that money disappears somehow.
Right.
Right. And I
you
gave you money. Where's my money?
Right. And then breaking it down and showing that, it's a credit here and a debit here, just so that they can see how the accounting plays out. And then just look at that bottom line number, make sure that you got all the credits that you needed and all the charges to you, the debits, and it should come to this.
It really is. That's probably, I think, throughout my career, one of the things that most of my, especially again, I say that on the buy side because they've got the bank charges. Buyers have complimented me on saying that you explain this in a way which I understand it and make me feel comfortable. And it took time to learn that form and make sure you understand and can find every penny within that. Yeah. That it's all accounted for. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's what you're looking for when hiring an agent.
But I wonder why Michigan got away from the HUD settlement and went to this closing disclosure. Because when I close on stuff in New Jersey, all I sign is a HUD statement. I get a HUD settlement statement. That's what I sign. And then there's some disclosures for the title company and stuff. There's no other real closing docs.
You know what's funny on that, Rick, is that, and I think this is true, when that change took place, they were saying we're going to create this closing disclosure because it's going to be easier for people to understand.
That was one of the reasons. The other reason was, though, the closing numbers, the financials of the closing were private between the lender and the buyer, and the realtor was now kind of pushed out. But almost every buyer I've ever had is asking me, hey, is this correct? Does this look right?
Right. I kind of coach my buyers up front saying, listen, this is a confidential thing between you and your lender. Give them permission to send it to me, or plain and simple, when you get it, you can
just send it to me. Yeah.
Because it is very, very confusing. And I still, again, I rely on that Alta as far as my tool to explain the document, because I find, okay, there's this group of numbers. Here's the other thing I don't like about the CD. They put all title charges in that section, right? So the seller providing your owner policy amount in there, that ends up in there, or the transfer tax. And then you have to find the credit on the other side. It's just to me, it's too confusing.
The thing is that, they broke it up and they try to create these sections that are simplified, but by breaking up these sections, they made it more complicated. And again, the HUD statement was already so simple.
Yeah.
It's not like it was that complicated. It's almost like they fixed a problem that wasn't, and nobody was complaining about.
Right.
In order for protecting the consumers.
Right.
And it comes across as if somehow we're the bad guys in that, like we're trying to take advantage of people, when really what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect them from predatory lenders.
Right.
So what they came up with still makes no sense.
I don't really understand it. And someday maybe it'll go back to what it used to be. I don't know.
Well, I didn't realize that it was state by state or whatever. I thought that was kind of like a national change.
Right. You would think so, just because of Fannie and Freddie, right? That's national.
Yeah. Right. But again, I guess I'm not buying in New Jersey. The stuff I'm buying, we're buying cash. We're not buying with a mortgage. So maybe that component is still there, but the closing document is a HUD settlement statement. So it's interesting. And that's also the other weird thing. You walk out of that closing and that's all you really have is a copy of this HUD statement. You're just like, oh, are we done for real?
So I'm wondering if this falls under that category of nobody cares. Back when I used to do this, all we got was a HUD settlement statement, and that was better than the CD, right? Nobody cares how long you've been doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing it all back to that. No, I think you went over some pretty good examples. The land contract one is great. There's so many components there that, without the right experience, it's easy to get lost in it, or a lot of time can get wasted, right? And then frustration if you don't know what to do, if you haven't dealt with these things. And again, like the septic and well, knowing that ahead of time that this is what to expect, setting everybody up. Seller needs to know that, hey, they might be holding $15,000 of your money until this is all resolved. You're not going to get as much money as you think at the closing. Being able to preemptively talk to them about that, that's where the experience kicks in, right? Being able to explain these things and walk them through it. Because that's what we're supposed to be doing. We need to hold people's hands. Not everybody needs that, but the people that do, we need to be able to do that for them.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. Is you really, we've touched on this throughout all of these podcasts. Is you got to bring more to the table than being the person that opens the door and collects a check.
Right.
You
Right.
really should learn all these facets of what we do. And I've talked about Avery before. She's licensed for 2 years now,
Yeah, something like
and
that.
she's learning this. And she had this transaction representing the buyer, and it happened to be a for sale by owner seller. And I just thought that was the perfect opportunity, because she's really, of course, we know, doing both sides of the transaction. Yep. She's doing what a listing agent would have done or should have done, and she's, of course, doing the job for her buyer. And so part of that was, okay, I got this title commitment that they sent over. What am I supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm going to explain that to you, and here's what you're going to look for, and here's where you look for it, and here's why you look for it.
Yeah.
And she goes, wow, do people do this? I go, no,
No.
no, they don't. They just think the title company sent it and I'm good. And that's where you start to see those things of, hey, I need a discharge of a land contract from 1989.
Yeah. I had that with a deal. Well, it's not recently now. It's probably about a year ago. We had a similar situation. This house in Sterling Heights. He didn't owe anything on the property. He owned the property outright, but on title came up this Bank of America line of credit from like 15 years ago or something. And it showed that it was still open. And he was like, no, that was paid off in like 2016 or 2015 or something like that. So we had to track it down. It wasn't too easy to find either, because that account had been closed like a long time ago. And like his actual account for him to access. So he couldn't even say, here's the account number. He actually had to get a hold of customer support, ask them, tell them the time frame and the amount based on what was on the commitment. So based on that, he was able to finally track it down and get somebody to send him a discharge letter. Otherwise, it was showing the whole amount, the whole line. It's something like an $80,000 line of credit. It showed the whole amount was due still.
So these transactions, right? A real estate transaction involving a mortgage, call it a 30 to 45 day window that it takes, right?
Yeah.
And all these little time restraints that are on an agreement saying must get a title commitment within X days of an acceptance.
Yeah.
That's why they're there. And you can't just, especially if you're on the listing side, but equally if you represent the buyer, you're going to get a copy of a title commitment too. And if you see that, it's not beyond the scope of what you should be doing.
Right.
To follow up with the head agent saying, hey, I see these 2 underlying mortgages. Did you, are you aware of them? And did the seller you got payoffs ordered on those? And to address that early on, because everybody wants to get to the finish line, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, like you say, to track down an old unrecorded discharge of a mortgage from 20 years ago, it might take some time.
Right.
And it holds everything up. And, when you start stacking transactions, right? How often is it Mr. Seller's selling and they're already gone and have a place to go, and the buyer's moving in and they came from mom and dad's house? I mean, that happens, but usually it's okay. The buyer sold their house and those people bought their house and they're waiting to get into that house, and these people bought this house and these people are waiting to close down here because these people got to close on this one.
It's a domino effect.
And you start stacking these things so closely together, and one obstacle like a discharged mortgage that, or non-discharged mortgage, we should say, it was never recorded, and you got to track that down. That throws a wrench in everything.
Yeah. Yep.
And then again, if you're the agent on one side or the other of that transaction, and you're just finding out about it because you didn't go through that title commitment, who do you think they're going to start pointing the finger at and looking to?
Right.
That seller starts looking, go, why didn't you bring this up earlier?
Yep.
I never looked at a title commitment.
Yeah. I don't know how to,
Yeah.
that's the problem. So definitely making sure that these different aspects of these deals, you've got to learn, you've got to have a resource you can learn from. And most of that kind of stuff also comes from just the experience. The more transactions you do, the more stuff like this you see, You learn how to resolve it. Like the title company will tell you, like if you've never done a deal before and you ran into that, there was a discharge that wasn't recorded. Title company will tell you that, oh, you need the seller to find the discharge and give it to us. So now at least you have a clue what I need to do. I need to contact my seller and let them know that there's a discharge that's missing. They might have it in a file folder somewhere, right? So, or they might have to log into their bank and order one, or call customer support and order one. But either way, the title company will give you these clues. Then you build on that experience. Now, next time this comes up, you know exactly what to do. So yes, you can get through it as a new agent. That experience just makes things go quicker and smoother and keeps everybody calm too. Your seller's not getting upset, like, what's going on here? Why can I not close on my,
and I wish, Rick, I wish agents would be more open with their experience to the other agent. And I've had this over the years where a new agent has said to me, hey, just so you know, I'm brand new at this. So, I just, anything that you can share to make this easier, I just wanted to let you know I'm new. And I just find that takes courage. I have an immense amount of respect for somebody who's willing to say that.
That's a great attitude.
It really is, because again, we were all new at one time. And just to say, hey, listen, go easy on me. It's my first time. I think that's very admirable.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think you covered a lot of good stuff here. And again, that's the name of our podcast, The Broker Experience. That's what we're talking about here, and hopefully people are getting a lot out of this. I'm really looking forward to getting Chuck back in here next time, and hopefully we can have a good topic for him, because I think it would be worth it to go through like what to expect when you're dealing with short sales and foreclosures, because that was really his team was really, that was their bread and butter. That's where he was rocking and rolling during all that time, his relationship with the banks and how all that works.
Hey, that would be a great thing, right? On our podcast, they can leave us a note, any topics that they want us to maybe touch on. That'd be a great
100%.
thing for us.
I'll say that right to the camera.
Right.
If you have any ideas, any topics you'd like us to discuss, comment below and we'll make an effort to work that into our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Rob.
I think we do have the broker experience.
100%. Way to work that back in there. All right. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
All right. Peace out.